Bonjour et bienvenue à la 35e réunion.
Welcome to the 35th meeting of the Board of Internal Economy. I'd like to welcome you all. We have quite a heavy agenda today, and there are certainly some things that we would like to discuss today. 2 topics in public, 3 and 4. And in camera, there will be 1 issue that it would be preferable to make decisions and recommendations today. So we'll begin with number 1, minutes of previous meeting. We all received the minutes. Would anyone like to propose adoption? Ms. de Bellefeuille, okay? No, I propose, but I'd like to discuss something else. You want to discuss number 1? Number 2? Okay. Everyone agrees? Very good.
Business arising from the previous meetings. I see Madame de Bellefeuille. Elle a sa main levée.
She has her hand up, Ms. de Bellefeuille. Well, simply, Mr. Speaker, in the follow-up, they talk about the healthcare system for members. We'd ask for comparison between the 2 systems that cover health insurance of MPs. There apparently had been changes. I'd like to thank Ms. Evangelidis' team because we've seen that there were major changes between the systems, not necessarily negative ones, in certain cases positive, and that was a major job of comparison. But there is one little issue to discuss. When it comes to drug insurance, maybe there's something we should work on that. We got good advice, good directives from Caroline's team to indicate how some expenses should be recognized. So I wanted to congratulate the whole team because it was a lot of work, and I think it was instructive for everyone in the administration and for each party caucus. So I thank her for that follow-up. Thank you very much, Ms. de Bellefeuille. I know that Caroline's team worked very hard to produce this comparison, and we greatly appreciate your comments. If there are other specific items, I invite any member to raise these questions with us, with the administration, and we'd be very pleased to do some follow-up on that. Can we now go on to item 2? Number 3. Now, I invite Paul Saint-Jean, Mr. Kells, and Mr. Fernandez to come to the table to make their presentation.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, José Fernandez, Assistant to the Senior Director of Finance, and Robin Kells, Senior Director. We are speaking to the board to inform it of the impact of the redistribution of ridings following the 2021 census. We are asking for approval from the board when it comes to policy and funding. The number of seats in the House will go from 338 to 343. So 3 in Alberta, 1 in BC, and 1 in Ontario. The administration has examined the principles approved by the board in 2015. Following consultations with the whips, the administration is proposing policies in order to limit impact on the members of Parliament. The riding redistribution represents a major change that affects not only geographic limits, but also the names of ridings and the placement of offices. These changes could create operational and financial pressure on certain members of Parliament. These pressures are totally out of their control. The administration has to make sure that members can continue to serve their constituents in an effective and efficient manner during the transition. The proposals of these policies seek to achieve two key objectives: limit the impact of redistribution on members' budgets by putting certain costs in the central budget so that members can emphasize their parliamentary duties while reducing negative effects on voters. And then mitigate operational disturbances caused by redistribution by providing clear guidelines and adapted support mechanisms.
To the electoral boundary redistribution approaches adopted in 2015, the proposed policies introduce practical measures to address gaps identified with respect to the next EBR's scope. For example, as in 2015, assets will follow re-elected members. And to ensure a level of operational readiness, newly elected members with no offices or assets to inherit will have access to funding to equip their new constituency offices. As of today, 57 constituency offices belonging to 49 members are located outside the new electoral boundaries. Depending on election outcomes, some of these offices may need to be closed or reassigned to other members. In these cases, costs related to office moves, lease termination, and asset divestment will be charged to a central budget if incurred within 120 days following the election. In situations where members are affected by constituency name changes, it is proposed that reasonable expenses for the replacement of assets or items displaying the former constituency name be covered by a central budget for 12 months following the general election. Similarly, other measures grounded in the principles of easing the operational and financial pressures of the EBR on members are outlined in the recommendations before you. While the administration has attempted to foresee as many EBR impacts as possible, it is proposed that the clerk be authorized to make temporary exceptions to these policies for 4 months following the next general election, ensuring flexibility to handle unforeseen situations.
To address funding for the 5 new constituencies, the administration ensured that the allocation of related member budgets adheres to established budget policies. Cost drivers for the 5 new members were carefully considered in the development of funding proposals for the administrative budgets. For example, there were 30 new members in 2015, and 49 offices were located outside of the new boundaries. This time, we estimate 57, an increase of 8. 14% of constituencies remained unchanged in 2015, which is also comparable to the position now. Other key cost drivers that we considered were tangible costs of $300,000 increased license fees and infrastructure costs, 600 new assets inventory managed and to support, 40 new members, employees to provide human resource services, and approximately 11 new suites to maintain. In addition, we considered 10 residents that will require security and relocation. Funding requested for the administration includes the lowest of 3 costing methodologies. The first methodology we went through was a comprehensive calculation from all services and resulted in approximately $1 million in permanent funding. The second methodology involved taking the approved 2015 submission and then prorating the approved funding for 30 members to 5 and adjusting it for inflation to reflect current values. This approach resulted in approximately $700,000. The third methodology, which is the lowest, started with $700,000 from methodology 2 and adjusted for services not impacted by the activities. This would include legal and procedures. The resulting value of $597,000 reflects this adjustments and is considered reasonable based on the 2015 submission. This lesser amount is before you for approval. The administration has worked diligently to minimize the funding request while meeting the needs of the 5 constituencies. It is therefore recommended that the board approve the 7 EBR policies included in the submission, the temporary costs of $2.7 million to be funded within existing budgets, and the permanent funding of $4.8 million to be included in the upcoming mains estimates. This concludes our presentation, and Mr. Speaker, I welcome any questions from the board.
Questions et commentaires. J'ai Monsieur Shears.
Questions and comments? I have Mr. Shear on the list.
Great comprehensive presentation. I just had a bit of a thought that I wonder if my colleagues might agree with me on the 120 days for relocating an office. For those of us that have had to move, it can be very time-consuming to find a location, to deal with a landlord that would be willing to enter into the types of contracts that the House of Commons insists on, improvements that need to be made to make a space available. And I'm just thinking in the aftermath of an election, and we all know what that does to our teams, and that I just wonder if 120 days is a little bit tight, and if I fully agree with the principle of seeking permission from another member to have an office in that riding, but wonder if 180 days might be a little bit more reasonable for all that comes with, because it says in the I believe it says in the presentation that you'd have 120 days to wind down operations in the existing office, and I'm just wondering if we could be a little bit more lax with that to give new members or re-elected members who are in this situation enough time to really do a thorough search. Sometimes finding trades to do the improvements in a new building can be frustratingly long because there's still a lack of skilled labor in some markets in Canada. So I just wanted to throw that out there for a little bit more of a permissive period of time.
St. George.
We certainly are open to adjusting. The only conflict is with the termination clause within the lease agreements are for 120 days.
Right. So a member in a current office would have to give 120 days notice, but this would give them an additional 60 days to at least start the process before they had to give the notice. So I understand where you got the 120 days from, but as I read it, you would almost have to give notice the day after the election, and then you might find yourself in a position of, having to rush to find something to satisfy that. So anyway, I just would throw that out there for a little bit more of flexibility for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 120 days is built on the mandatory clauses that were approved by the BOIE. So after an election, the leases are assigned to the House of Commons. So during that period, the lease is under the name of the House of Commons, and members, they have that duration to close their operation if they no longer want to operate the office, especially if they inherit multiple office after distribution. After the 120 days period, it's really up to the member if the member wants to stay longer to negotiate something longer with the landlord, and we've seen that in the past. In most cases, 120 days is more than sufficient in that the member will be able to make a decision soon after the election whether or not they want to keep which office, the office that they inherited. So we cannot make any commitment to have a longer period because what the mandatory clauses are stating right now, it's 120 days.
Yeah. So just sort of clear.
Si nous changeons cela à 180 jours, est-ce que cela va changer les choses? Est-ce que l'article dit 120 jours après une élection? Si par exemple un député a passé un accord qui dépasse les 120 jours, si l'on veut pouvoir appliquer une période prolongée, il faudra que cela soit inscrit dans chaque contrat individuellement. Madame de Bellefeuille.
What you said was not interpreted. Well, Madame de Bellefeuille, what I was saying is the 120 days reflect the compulsory clauses approved by the BOIE and the members. If we wanted to extend this to 180 days, the BOIE can make that decision, but it has to be reflected in the leases of all members, because what binds the tenants and landlords is the contract. I have Mr. Julian, but is there follow-up to that question? Well, I think they're all follow-ups, so Mr. Julian.
To agree with Mr. Scheer, I mean, just thinking of the sheer practicality. You come out of an election campaign, cleaning up your signs, you're taking down your office. A new member is elected that is actually where your constituency office is because of redistribution. 21 calendar days simply is not realistic when you have a new member that doesn't even have an office and you're trying to get their permission. And the 6 months seems to me to be more appropriate and realistic as well. That doesn't change the lease termination costs equivalent to a maximum of 4 months' rent. But the reality is, I think the clerk needs to be authorized for a period of up to 6 months, and those additional, the expense window should be 180 days rather than 120 days, just because we understand a couple of things coming out of a campaign. It's quite possible that a new member that actually has that constituency may not even be up and running, and so getting that consent will be more difficult. And then in terms of actually finding another office, in areas like the area I represent, the search to get a new office is something that takes a number of months. And so I think there needs to be more flexibility in this. We can put any date that we want, but I just don't see these dates as realistic given what the reality is on the ground. And I think the BOIE policies, which include the 4 months rent, which I certainly agree with, should reflect a framework that actually makes it important for members of parliament or new members of parliament to respect what the BOIE has written down. And reading through this, I, like Mr. Scheer, think that it might be very difficult to respect the guidelines given a number of variables in this. So I would agree with changing it to 180 days in those two clauses, keeping the 4 months rent. And I would suggest having longer than the 21 calendar days when a new member may not even be the re-elected member may not even be able to contact them in a 21-day period following an election. To make it more realistic, I think a 60-day period would make more sense.
Ms. Kells?
Thank you. In our experience, as the law clerk mentioned, we find that the 120 days covers adequately most members' needs, but as he mentioned, we do exercise flexibility, and we do support both through the members' orientation program, but just in general at election time, and specifically with the upcoming election and the electoral boundary redistribution. We will be working in very close partnership with members, the House Administration, to assist those that may be struggling with those timeframes. Our team is going to be dedicating a few resources to the members affected intensely by EBR so that we can provide that close partnership to accompany them and support their decisions throughout. We work in terms of contacting the new members within that 21 days. The members orientation program is very much attuned to that difficulty, and they do work very hard to maintain the contact information of the members who are not re-elected and can help bridge that gap. So it is something that we are definitely attuned to.
J'ai Madame de Bellefeuille.
Madame de Bellefeuille. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not really convinced that this extension is justified, Mr. Scheer's proposal. I don't think it's relevant in the sense that Ms. Kells has just told us that 120 days has not presented a problem historically, and MPs who needed flexibility to extend their lease for whatever reason did receive the support of the administration. I understand that switching from 120 to 180 means that all the leases of all MPs have to be modified. Even if they don't move, they'll have to change their lease, though they'll have to negotiate with the landlords with whom they already have a contract. Seems to me that's quite a lot of work. And for members who are not moving, it's something that they have to do in order to comply with the next rules if we go from 120 to 180, unless I'm mistaken in my logic here. So my opinion would be, let's keep the 120. We don't have any demonstrable facts that show that it presents a problem. In my caucus, we never had that problem. I can't speak to other caucuses. Let's keep the 120. Let's offer flexibility. That is what we have heard from people who are worried. Let's not change the rule from 120 to 180 because that will necessitate a lot of administrative work for newly elected members as well as not new ones. So maybe I misunderstood the consequences here, but my first question would be to Mr. Bédard to find out whether what I've said is true. Would there be a cost for the administration if we were to switch from 120 to 180? Are we talking about an increase in the budget? Thank you, Madame de Bellefeuille. I think you're correct. Mr. Bédard. You're right, Ms. de Bellefeuille. All the leases would have to be renegotiated. All the members' leases, the members would have to renegotiate with their landlords. Now, if the BOIE wants to review these compulsory rules and change it from 120 to 180, that's another matter, but that's nothing you can do within a year of an election under the circumstances. When it comes to financial aspects, for the figures themselves, I'd let the Director of Finance give you precise figures, but that 4 months or 6 months notice is compensation for the tenant, for members who want to close their offices very soon after the election. They're paid for 4 or 6 months, so there'd be 2 months paid additionally for space that's not being used by the House or by the MP. Ms. Gould.
Mr. Speaker, so I guess from the outset, I don't have any issue with Mr. Scheer's suggestion, although it sounds administratively burdensome. And if we have confirmation from the House administration that they will demonstrate flexibility in the situations where needed, then I think I'm okay to stick with where we are. But I would like to have that confirmation from the House administration. The other point that I wanted to raise was with regards to notifying a member, given the high number of constituencies that are going to be affected by the boundaries of the redistribution, the boundaries that will be redistributed. I just wonder if it doesn't make more sense to just waive that requirement for the 120 days following the next election, understanding that that will just be the case because there are going to be so many ridings where constituency offices are present currently, and understanding that those offices will change because they will, within that 120-day period, naturally have to move into the existing riding. Of course, if it goes beyond the 120-day period, they should have that agreement between members, but it just feels like a lot of extra administration and management that the House administration would need to do for something that will get sorted out. But there's just such a high number of ridings that are changing that it just seems unnecessary to do that at this point in time. So my recommendation would, why don't we just align it with the 120-day period in general?
So let's do this in 2 parts. So the first part, get confirmation or not if there's flexibility that can be offered, and secondly, let's deal with the question of notification in the as many as 57 cases. I think you had said, Mr. St. George, of constituency offices that will find themselves outside of the riding after redistribution. Mr. St. George.
In terms of the confirmation flexibility, of course, we've included in there where Mr. Eric would have that flexibility to make those case-by-case reviews. And I think we've demonstrated throughout the last election and over the last a while, we've been fairly flexible in that. So I would support that it would remain, I guess, as it is from a administrative perspective within our costing. We did not include anything related to that burden that you talked about. In terms of dollars, what that is, I do not know, but it would be considerable in terms of 57 constants and renegotiating of that, plus the additional between the 338. To have that done for the election would be probably an impossible task, to be honest. In terms of the contacting, I think that would be done fairly quickly. We have an MOP office that's in place. I think they are fairly structured, strongly structured, to have those support system in place throughout the entire process of the election process. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
What would be the, like, why wouldn't we just waive that? Like, what is there an absolute need to do that? The BOIE could just waive that, understanding that there's going to be 57 ridings where that happens. And having been a new MP at one point in my career, there's a lot going on. And so whether it is the new MP that is going into a new riding or a new MP that is elected into an existing riding, like, it just seems like one extra thing that we don't need to do if we know this is already an issue and if there's a timeline on it. Because every MP, I assume, will actually want to have a constituency office in their actual riding, right? So it just seems like an unnecessary thing to do when we know that this is something that we could just not do, right?
Ms. Kels?
Yes, maybe I can answer from more a technical perspective here, is that it's 57 offices that are currently outside the boundaries, and it's 49 members who are 49 constituencies to which those 57 offices belong. And the way that we are approaching that, so maybe I could remind of the intention behind the board's approval of the original 120-day assignment or lease termination period and assignment clause. So prior to 2015, it used to be that we would move all of the assets out of every constituency office at dissolution, and then members could newly elected members could decide if they were going to assume that office, and if they were, we would move the assets back in, and if they were going to move somewhere else, we would move the assets to the new location. Members at the time, the feedback we received was we would like to be able to get up and running a lot quicker, because that forced newly elected members to wait a longer period of time. And logistically, it was an incredible exercise. So the board approved back in 2015 the notion of assignment clauses where for that 120-day period, the leases are assigned to the House of Commons and the assets remain in the offices. That allows the newly elected member, and let me add to that, the 21-day closure period was intended to allow the newly elected member to come in and start their operations as soon as possible after that 21 days. And so now what we find happens is that members are able to get up and running a lot quicker because of that. For the 57 offices that are outside the riding currently, depending on the election results, those offices could be reassigned to the constituency in which they are located, the new constituency in which they are located, which would give that member representing that riding the opportunity to take that office, as an example. So there are many permutations depending on the election results, and the House administration is tooled now to, on the day that we find out the election results, calculate where all those permutations are going to land in terms of lease assignment, And that's why we are going to be working very closely with all of those members that would be affected and help them make decisions around either deciding not to keep surplus assets or offices, or helping them keep it or close them. Yes.
That's great, that's all fine, but I guess my question is, does that still necessitate a member communicating with another member if the House is going to decide which constituencies those offices are going to be in? So I think that what I'm asking is just the waiving of the members communicating with another member, because it sounds like from what you just said that the House is actually deciding that. So it sounds like it's actually moot to have a member get permission and agreement. It just sounds like an extra administrative thing that we don't need to do, from what you're saying.
Yeah. So the rule that is behind that is that a member cannot operate an office that's located in a constituency belonging to another member.
I understand all of that. But that's exactly because you just said that the House is going to decide which constituency an office will belong to the day after the election. So it seems like an unnecessary thing for a member to have to do. So I'm just saying, let's suspend or waive that rule for 120 days following the election, so that, like, it just seems like we don't have to do it because the House is already deciding that, and there's still 120 days for an MP in the new boundaries to decide whether or not they want to keep that. And I'm very supportive of the process that you have laid out. I'm just saying, let's waive that one rule for that 120-day period.
So I'm going to ask Ms. Kells, followed by Mr. Bedell, if necessary.
Maybe I could clarify that the office that finds itself outside of the constituency border now, the new redrawn boundary, still belongs to that member that is to the re-elected member, let's say in this example, right? So that re-elected member can decide. So it's not the House admin deciding. That re-elected member would decide whether they are going to keep that office running. If it's so, if member A is elected in this constituency, re-elected over here, but now his office is here, that office still belongs to that re-elected member? Okay. Okay.
Understand? Yeah.
Okay.
There's 2 minutes left for voting. Has everyone also... Oh, sorry, 2 minutes left in the bells. Forgive me. 2 minutes left in the bells. Yeah. So just keeping that in mind.
Juste un petit point de règlement, Monsieur le Président, c'est que ici.
Little point of order here. Wi-Fi doesn't work very well. I would go and vote outside the room because I'm having trouble. If I have trouble, I'll leave the room. Could we suspend a few minutes so that we can vote remotely if you see that we are having problems here? Yes, absolutely.
To respond to, just to get a little more clarification on the question that you just raised, Ms. Gould, could I ask Mr. Bedell to intervene?
So as Ms. Kells was saying, the 21 days is for the member to get the permission from the other member to have the office in another member's writing, and waiting 120 days could create some challenges in that for a number of the permission from the member should not take as long as more than 21 days. It's just yes or no. And then once the decision is made, the member have to cease to operate the office, but then has still time to move and find another office, or maybe inherit other office.
I don't want to get into an argument about what's practical. I think all of us who have gone through elections, and especially when you do take over a riding, when there is change in an area, I can foresee it being a challenge to get a hold of somebody.
Especially if they've lost.
Especially if they've lost. or even if they've won, to make a decision within 21 days about to have another MP have their office, like it might be the type of thing that someone wants to reflect on, that wants to consult with their own whips, depend. It might seem like 21 days is a lot, but when you're trying to wind down a campaign, thank volunteers, as you point out, if a member's lost, sometimes they just need to go and decompress. And I have some sympathy with what's being expressed for some flexibility. And I understand the constraints that you have on an administrative level with the clauses that are in the leases. But which maybe I could ask a quick question. When a member grants approval for another member to have an office in their own constituency, is that in perpetuity? Is that for the life of a parliament? Is that until it's revoked? How permanent can that arrangement be?
The member can operate in another member's constituency as long as the hosting member allows it.
Okay, so grace and favor, kind of like as soon as it's.
And we have one office in that situation now.
So I'm sorry, I don't understand why you're so opposed to waiving that rule for a period of time. Because I can say in my own experience, like when I was elected and the member had lost, like they would not return my calls, right? So, we came in on day 21, but I did not hear from that member, right? They refused to engage with me. So, I understand that those are the rules, but what I'm saying in this particular situation, because it is so complex, I feel like we should be able to extend it. I mean, Mr. Julian had said extend it to 60 days. I would be supportive of that. It just allows for that flexibility. And again, if you are reelected and your office is in boundaries that are no longer yours, you still are serving your community, right? And there's an opportunity to have a conversation with your neighboring ridings. And, to Mr. Scheer's point, 21 calendar days is not a lot of time. And so if we can agree on 60 days, I would be supportive of that. I just think that it seems like you're stuck in this position that is actually very difficult for some people to act upon because of the nature of the transition that we have. And I just don't see that we have to do that. And I think, if the Board of Internal Economy agrees, then let's move forward with 60 days, after 60 days, because it would just enable that transition to happen in a way that might actually be possible, because you might end up in a situation where there are people who don't talk to each other and they don't get permission. We don't know the nature of those interpersonal relationships. So I would posit that we extend that period to 60 days.
So, je suis en train de voir des
I'm looking at people nodding. We have Ms. de Bellefeuille, Mr. Julian first, then Ms. de Bellefeuille. But we will come back with that consensus and come back with figures if there's additional cost involved, so that the BOIE can make a decision that's well informed and get back to you as soon as possible, hopefully next week. Mr. Julian. There are no additional costs. I want to be very clear. We're not touching the lease here. There's two issues that are affected by the recommendation. First of all, when a member is reelected and his or her riding office is not in the riding, the member can have this budget put to the central budget if the funds are committed within 120 days. I agree with Mr. Scheer. He proposes 180 days after a general election. And the costs of moving, storage, installation of equipment, lease cancellation fees equivalent to 4 months maximum, that doesn't change. So we're not changing the leases. The costs are related to whatever is in the old offices. We want to put in place a policy that can be respected. And then lower down, the clerk of the House of Commons is authorized for 4 months. We're proposing 6 months following the next general election to waive the usual rules in order to deal with unpredictable situations. Talking about 6 months doesn't change anything. It just gives more realistic flexibility. And yes, it's true, this could come back to BOIE, but if we are seized with all these exceptions that could have been provided for in the policy, that's a waste of time. There's all these challenges that Ms. Hull and I and Mr. Scheer mentioned. It would give flexibility to the administration to do this earlier rather than have to consult the board. So it doesn't change the lease. It remains 4 months, but we're extending the 2 periods where there would be flexibility for the administration to deal with cases that are not resolved in 4 months. Not the lease, but other costs. That seems logical to me. Ms. Gould talked about the 60 days. I agree, because the 21 days, the reality is, why put in place a policy that will not be respected, most likely? 21 days is not realistic. Once again, we can come back before the board with this, but in my opinion, we're trusting the administration. We have administrators who are very gifted at the House of Commons. Rather than implement a policy that will not be respected, and then we'll be called upon to look at exceptions. Let's have a policy that can be respected, that's more realistic, and that means that the board will not be seized with all these exceptions. Thank you. I have Ms. de Bellefeuille. Ms. Gould, I'll add your name too. Mr. Bedard? When it comes to the duration of delegation, those 4 months that had been proposed, it's because it was something new. If that's extended to 6 months, there's no impact on the administration. When it comes to the 21 days versus 60 days, what we have to understand is the number of days that had been put forward was to reconcile the interests of all members. In that period, that might be the only office in a riding, and the newly elected MPs want to move into the office and can't do it because the delay is 21 days, and now it will be 60 days or any other number that's established by the board. We knew that the 21 days in certain cases could be difficult if there were communication issues or so on. That's why there's a proposal to have a delegation to the clerk to make exceptions. Now, after 21 days, the member who remains in the riding office means that the new MP is not in that office. So that's policy by the board, and I wanted to explain the policy that underlies it. Madame de Bellefeuille. Mr. Speaker, that's my reaction. I don't think that if the delay is 60 fixed days, the person who was defeated could also prolong the response to 60 days. Prolonging it is not just on one side, it can be either side. A member who burns bridges with the new MP who will occupy his office may not respond within 21 days, but it could go up to 60 days. That doesn't really solve the problem that Ms. Gould raised. Now, quite sincerely, what I don't want to see happen, I don't know. Maybe we're inventing problems here. I don't think there are problems that have been pointed out to the administration in any significant way that would lead to profound changes that will have an impact on re-elected MPs. Let me give you an example, Mr. Speaker. If I'm re-elected and I'm told, well, now the board has changed from 120 to 180 days, I'm forced to renegotiate my lease. In renegotiating my lease, the landlord can take advantage of this to increase the rent. that will have a financial impact on my members' budget, my operating budget. If there is no problem and the administration guarantees some flexibility and the clerk has delegation to look at cases on a case-by-case basis, I have trust in the clerk and in the administration. I'm wondering, seems to me, we don't want to manage exceptions and we're trying to have a rule that covers everything. I don't agree with profound changes like that without knowing all the repercussions. So the alarm ringing for re-elected members who come back will be having to renegotiate their lease. I don't think that's good for the taxpayer or the MP. The other thing I'm thinking is that 120-day delay is a warning to the landlord. Well, are we saying we're signing a lease with you, and if we decide to leave after the 10th day, you're going to get 6 months' rent that we're going to pay? I think that's a lot of money to put on the table there with a private landlord. If there is no problem, if I'm told that most tenants have a lot of problems, okay. But here we're saying we're going to give you 6 months' notice. That's 6 months' rent to a landlord that may not even need it if the member moved within the deadline. I have trouble understanding this, maybe because in Quebec we don't have those problems. I don't know. I'm trying to understand because it seems to me that the current rules are okay. I completely agree with the change the administration has made that allows us to recover the assets and open an office. You can be elected or re-elected, and on day 2 you arrive in an office and everything you need is have your internet connected and you're active, your phone works, and you can serve your constituents. But if you take more time, you negotiate that with the administration. So I don't know. I just don't understand the issue right now. I don't want it to come to a vote because that's the first thing we're discussing. There's a lot of things we need to discuss today, but I just don't understand. I don't know what you're going to do with this because before I give my okay, I want to understand the issues. And I don't seem to be able to understand it, or I don't understand why the administration is saying there is a problem with the current rules.
Vous êtes la prochaine personne.
You're the next person on the list. Gould, then Mr. Julien.
I think it's important to clarify what I was suggesting. I'm not saying change the 21-day period in general. I was saying give longer for those 49 ridings where there is going to be that issue of who is there. So if you are saying that, riding A, the person who is re-elected or newly elected in that riding, their constituency offices in riding B, will allow them to start within those 21 days, but provide more flexibility to decide where that office is going to be, as opposed to saying in that 21 days they have to come to an agreement. Because I think, as Mr. Scheer said, there may be broader conversations that are happening. And so it's only with regards to extending the period of time or waiving the need to come to an agreement with another member of Parliament as to those offices that find themselves in new boundaries, as opposed to the 21-day period where a new member of Parliament takes over for that riding office. That's the only thing I'm asking for. And I think given the high number of members of Parliament and electoral districts that are going to find themselves in this situation, it doesn't make sense to limit their ability to have those conversations in the immediate period following an election. And so, to your question, Madame de Bellefeuille, it is actually trying to reduce the administrative burden that will come because of this change. We don't face it right now because we don't have this high number of boundary changes, and we haven't had this high number of boundary changes in the last number of elections. And so that's why I'm suggesting, because we know there are going to be approximately 50 ridings for whom this is going to be a challenge, let's provide, as Mr. Julian said, that flexibility in advance, as opposed to having to reconvene this table to deal with problems that will arise. And as much as I want to say that, there will be positive relationships and this will go well between neighboring ridings, I don't know if that will be the case. And so why don't we provide you that flexibility in advance and enable that to happen? That's the only suggestion that I am making, is with regards to those specific ridings. And that's why I said, why don't we waive that requirement for a longer period of time? Not that MPs shouldn't be able to take over the riding or the office within 21 days. So I hope that clarifies what I was proposing.
Well, thank you for that. I'd like to reassure you and all board members that that flexibility actually does exist right now with the administration in the case, in those cases where it does pass over 21 days. But I will let I'll let Mr. St. George just talk about that.
Yeah, just quickly, the 21 days is also embedded within the lease agreements. Certainly, we can provide, like I said, on a case-by-case, depending on the member, depending on the instance, have that conversation with the landlord, negotiate an extension. But certainly, I think going forward, yeah.
Maybe it's good the delegation that is proposed in the submission to entrust the clerk with the power to make exception to bylaws and policy during a 4 months or 6 months period is proposed exactly to deal with those situations where there might still be ongoing negotiations or discussion between members, so that the 21 days is not enabling, but is rather an obstacle. So this is exactly why the delegation was put in. If there is a refusal within the 21 days, a clear refusal, then the member will have the rest of the 4 months to close, to move out, and then the other member could move in. But if it's not the intention of the administration to implement the 21 days in a way that could prevent an agreement or consensus between members, quite to the contrary, because it will mean more efficient operation, because the member will stay in the premises, will stay in the same office. So as long as there is a possibility that the member stay and there's no refusal from the member, the clerk, I trust, will exercise his discretion to extend the 21-day timeline. Really?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it.
Go ahead, Ms. Gould. Then I will pass on to Mr. Julian.
Okay. So I am going to live through this coming out of the next campaign. There's a constituency office neighboring riding that is currently in the heart of that riding, but redistribution, it would be in my riding. So that member then contacts me and says they want to maintain their riding. And I send a note within 21 days saying, no, tell me what happens after that.
So after that, the member has to clear out of the office within that 120-day period. And it has to cease operations immediately.
Okay. The person tries to contact me, and I just don't respond. What happens then?
Same scenario. It's
After 21 days?
Yes.
So I basically veto if I don't respond within 21 days. That's exactly the point that Ms. Gould was making, and Mr. Scheer as well. That is not a practical and intelligent response to how we should be managing in a post-election time when we're busier often than we are during the election campaign, cleaning up offices. We have campaign offices to clean up, signs to clean up, etc. That's why the provision to allow for some flexibility makes sense, because what you're saying is, regardless of whether the 21 days that person is able to get in contact with me or not, it's the same result, you see? And that's the problem that I think Ms. Gould and Mr. Scheer expressed very eloquently. And I don't understand the reluctance to put in place something that makes sense rather than having this all go to the BOIE. La deuxième question, c'est la question que Madame de...
The second question is the question Ms. de Bellefeuille raised. Whatever, we're changing the lease. We're not changing the lease. Ms. Gould, Mr. Scheer, and I all said that the cancellation fees for leases remain 4 months. The only thing we're saying is more flexibility for the clerk to authorize expenses around this and more flexibility for members to charge fees for these things. I don't really understand the reluctance to have a policy that could be obeyed and rather than one that may not always be respected. And the board will be seized with all these exceptions. What Ms. Gould said, Mr. Scheer said is full of common sense. I don't understand resistance to this. It doesn't change the leases, and it gives more flexibility for a member who cannot contact the other member for whatever reason. Maybe that member could keep an office in another riding. So it's a good policy. We're talking about real challenges, and I don't understand the resistance to these small adaptations so that this rule is respected more often, rather than deal with all these exceptions here when we have other fish to fry after an election. Not necessarily me, but other people around the table at the board will not be seized with all these exceptions.
Madame de Bellefeuille.
Ms. de Bellefeuille. It's not a question of resistance, Mr. Speaker. It's an issue of common sense, to my mind. I seem to understand from the administration, for about an hour now I've been hearing, and maybe I'm wrong, I hear that the flexibility exists already. It's there. I hear that the exceptions are really exceptional. I hear that this is not a generalized problem. And I'm no lawyer. I'm not an administrator. I trust the administration here. And I'm not convinced. This is not resistance. It's just I'm trying to base my decision on facts, and I don't have those facts. I understand that an MP who's in a tough situation will be an exception, but those are not common. That's what I understood. The clerk has all the powers, the administration too, so I don't see a problem here. If my colleagues see a big problem and you want to have a vote on this, I won't be against my colleague, but I don't think we're on the right path here. It's not the right analysis. I'm making a recommendation that we suspend this aspect of the discussion and the presentation so that we can talk to one another and understand each other. It seems to me we're not understanding each other. It's not resistance. I don't make decision without understanding what I'm deciding. Maybe Mr. Julian is interpreting my way of putting it, but it's not resistance. I want to understand and I don't understand. According to my reading, you're right, Ms. de Bellefeuille, the flexibility does exist. And I do understand Mr. Julian when he says changing from 120 to 180 days should not lead to financial consequences. I don't agree with that. I would say that if we include this in future leases, we're not talking about the leases. The leases stay the same. Ms. Gould, thank you. Ms. de Bellefeuille, what's different for me right now is that for the first time in years, we're going to have 50-odd members, 49, with 57 offices who will be in ridings other than theirs. So that's why it didn't happen before much. We didn't experience it in the same way we're having it now, because these are major changes that we're going to have after the next election. So it's true that the clerk has the flexibility to respond to these situations, but over history in the past, this may have happened once, 3 times. This time it could be 50 times. So what I'm proposing is we make sure that they should have to intervene only 5 times to solve a dispute between members rather than have to do it 50 times. It seems to me that if we extend this to 60 days, there'll be more opportunity to have these conversations. With all due respect for the administration of the House, if you have not experienced the time after an election, it's difficult to understand all the things that you need to do. So the only reason why I'm proposing this extension of time in these special circumstances for members and ridings that have these offices in a riding that is not their own is to have this flexibility and have more time to hold negotiations and a resolution without it having to go before the clerk of the House, without it having to come before the Board of Internal Economy, and to prevent issues that may occur in the future. That's the only reason I'm doing this. I do agree with Mr. Scheer and Mr. Julian that extending to 180 days after an election, but I understand why it's not necessary and maybe something extra for the administration. But on this issue, we will see there are complications. There will be disputes. Why not give you more time, more space to solve these difficulties rather than do it directly with the clerk or even here at the board? That's the only thing, is to prevent problems and facilitate a change that will be complicated for political reasons, for reasons of how members will react if they're not re-elected, and to facilitate the lives of newly elected MPs. That's the only reason. We have not experienced this situation before, or many years, or maybe never, with so many changes. That's the only reason.
Écoutez, ça fait.
Well, look, we've been discussing this for exactly an hour, 60 minutes. I have a solution to suggest here. If you agree, we will amend the proposal for 21 days to what was suggested by many members of the board. We'll go to 60 days for a situation where we have riding offices that are in a new riding after the redistribution. Secondly, does everyone agree? Is there consensus on that? Can we do that at least? Change it from 21 days to 60 days. Madame de Bellefeuille, you said for those who will be in a situation such as what Ms. Gould described, but not others. It's not necessary for the others. Only in the case where a riding office, after redistribution, ends up in a new riding. What do the experts think? Mr. Bedard? It's the decision of the board. That's that policy. 21 days was in alignment with the time that unelected MPs or defeated MPs had to leave there was something in the rules about 21 days. Now, if it's 60 days, in some cases, it's so the member can move later. But when there's a refusal, according to the proposal, the member in another riding has to cease activities and has that time to move. Ms. Gould. Yes, just to clarify.
What you said, but if someone is not reelected, they would still need to leave their office within the 21-day period. It's just that if that office was found in another riding, the newly elected person wouldn't have to get permission for 60 days from the other member of parliament, whether they could be there or not. Right? So I'm not suggesting waive the 21 days for moving into the office. It's just while you're negotiating if that office can stay in that new riding or not, that you have a bit more time to do that. That's what I'm suggesting.
Yes, that's how we understood it. Yes.
Sur la liste que j'avais.
On the list I had before I suggested this modification, I had Ms. de Bellefeuille, Ms. Gould, Mr. Julian. Madame de Bellefeuille, Ms. Gould, thank you as well. We'll now go on to Mr. Julian.
Number one, which is where the new member says no, still applies. That what we're just giving is a few more weeks for the contact so that we don't have this this unintended consequence of, because there has been no contact for whatever reason or no confirmation, that the person has to move out after 21 days. So I find this is a very very good compromise that allows for the scenarios that both Mr. Scheer and Ms. Gould raised.
Now that leaves the other part, which is regarding the comment est-ce qu'on dit ici résilience en français? Les clauses de résilience.
Cancellation, breaking the lease.
La résiliation du bail.
It is just allowing for the member and for administration to have expenses up until 6 months. It is not changing the lease. I insist on this again. We're talking about 4-month lease, résiliation de bail de 4 mois, quand même.
There'd be that 4 months, but give more flexibility to the administration and the member for certain fees, including breaking a lease, and that can't be more than 4 months.
Just give us a second, please.
Did we formally agree on the 60 days? Is that is done now? Yeah.
Madame de Bellefeuille, vous êtes correct avec les 60?
Ms. de Bellefeuille, you agree with the 60 days? Inaudible.
Bon.
Okay.
George, could you, so that we're all on the same page here, could you just walk us through the additional 60 days that we're looking to have, that members of the board are looking to have as flexibility?
So if we're talking about Section C, the specifically the 120 days, we don't see extra or incremental cost to the House of Commons as a result of the change from 120 to 180. So as per it was mentioned by Mr. Julian, it would simply be opening or widening of the number of days allowed for expenditures to go through.
Monsieur Bédard?
My comment is on the 21 days.
Okay.
Not necessarily the clause, paragraph C of the recommendation.
Mr. Julian?
My comment is on the 21 days policy, not on the your proposal that you're discussing right now. So I can wait.
And as well as a 21 to 60, we don't see any financial impact to that as well.
If I may, on the 21 days, the leases that have those the most current mandatory clauses, they have the 21 days stated in the lease. So while if the landlord agrees that the 21-day delay be extended, that's one thing. But there might be a situation where the landlord insists on 21 days, in which case the 60 days that the BOIE agrees on will in fact be 21 days because the landlord will be entitled to receive a notice within 21 days. So we could adjust the recommendation accordingly to capture that.
All right, so let's make sure that everybody's on the same page. Then if we take a look at the recommendations on page 6 in English, and I'm looking at page 7 en français.
Page 7 in French.
We're looking at clause A. We would be changing that number from 21 to 60 days. And in clause C, we'd be changing from 120 days to 180 days. Alors, pour répéter.
So to repeat, if we look at the recommendations on page 7, and the third is G, changing it from 4 months to 6 months, and for the clerk to be able to change it to 6 months. To repeat in French, when we look at the assignation, the recommendations under clause A, we'll change the 21 to 60 days. In clause C, we'll, if they committed within 180 days following a general election, and in G, it'll be changed on the first one toward first line, a period of 6 months instead of 4 months. Does everyone agree with that, with those changes?
Bon, thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Saint-Georges. And also, I'd like to take an opportunity to thank the House Administration for making an important change, which is to help members, rather than having their furniture moved out and held in storage, and then new members have to go through the process, and it takes months before they set up. I think the new policies that have been in place now for an election has been very, very helpful to get offices started with a minimum delay. Je vois que Madame de Bellefeuille a sa main levée.
I see Ms. de Bellefeuille has her hand up. Yes. Okay, now we've adopted the list of recommendations. Is that what I'm to understand? Yes. Okay. When we were consulted by the administration, we were consulted about the issue of supplements. That is for square kilometers or distance. There are members who have supplements, depending on the riding. That's added to their operating budget. And I see that this analysis, which resulted from the consultations, is not in the document. I really think we should discuss it because that whole question of supplements, maybe the time has come to modernize it. Should we take an indicator on population or square kilometers? We know that the list of ridings annexed to the Elections Act, there are not many ridings that are entitled to the supplements, but I think there are some ridings under the new redistribution that will have to have several riding offices. They don't have a dense population, and I think that on the question of supplements, we should take the time to discuss this because we have an opportunity to perhaps modernize our way of conceiving these supplements for the ridings coming up after the next general election. I don't know whether we should discuss it at a next meeting of the board. Since the administration took the time to consult us, I think we should look at that whole notion. For my part, I want to say that I'm sensitive to the notion of rural ridings that cover a great territory in order to meet voters. They have far more expenses because they need more than one office. They have to pay for a lot of travel, for their employees have to go to different offices, sometimes by plane or by car. Regional flights are less common. It's very expensive to go and meet constituents. If we look at the population issue, if you're in a highly dense and small riding, do you have the same financial requirements as an MP who has to manage a large riding? Under the new configuration of ridings, perhaps if we were to apply the current law rules, maybe some ridings should have a smaller budget. So we have to find solutions. I think we should take the time to look at this. Each caucus should be able to participate in this analysis so that we can be prepared when we discuss it here, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for that suggestion, Ms. de Bellefeuille. I think it's a good one. I can promise you that we'll put it on the agenda for an upcoming meeting of the board. Not necessarily next week, but we will do it as soon as possible in order to discuss that issue. You're absolutely right. It would be useful to hold that discussion. I can tell you that I don't represent a very large riding. It's very urban and concentrated, but that raises another issue. When we have ridings that are highly populated, we often have rents that are higher too. So there are already all kinds of things for very large geographic ridings. You're right, travel is a huge cost. It's not easy either. So the board would be well served in having a discussion about this at a future meeting. Thank you. We'll now go on to item 4. Once again, we have Monsieur Dicker, who's going to join us here, with Mr. Saint-Georges as well.
This hopefully will go quick.
Colleague, depend how this item goes. I'm going to suggest that after we discuss this item, that we move to item number 7, which is an important item for us to get to, as I said at the beginning of the meeting. Number 3, number 4, number 7 were items which actually have a direct impact on our meeting for next week. So I will suggest that if we move quickly along this, then perhaps we can continue along. But I would suggest that we do this in order of importance, and we'll come back out. All right, Monsieur Dicker, Monsieur Saint-Georges.
Mr. Dicker, Mr. Saint-Georges.
Good morning, board members. Je suis ici aujourd'hui pour...
I'm here today to inform the board of the state of technology in writing offices, to familiarize you with the life cycle of technology in ridings, and to ask the board to approve ad hoc costs and strategy to fund these activities. Previous submissions presented to the board in 2016, 2018, and in spring of 2024 for telephones indicated that the administration would come back before the board to obtain approval of life cycle financing. Modernization of technology in the offices is essential to respond to modern operational requirements, improve performance, and ensure harmonization with cybersecurity standards in the House of Commons. There will be 4 categories of distinct technology in the ridings: connectivity with the ridings, computers managed in the ridings, the telephone services in the ridings, and printing devices in the ridings.
These core technologies supporting constituency offices are outdated or near end-of-life stage, increasing the risk of system failures, security vulnerabilities, and operational disruptions. The Refresh Initiative will replace aging technologies, mitigate operational risk, and ensure alignment with modern business and cybersecurity needs. The legacy devices will be disposed of in a way that mitigates cybersecurity risks and complies with environmental standards. For the deployment strategy, following the election, the technology lifecycle actions will prioritize newly elected members as they establish their constituency offices, followed by returning members. The lifecycle program deployment is expected to span up to 24 months following the election. The program will seek to balance the ability for the House administration to concurrently deploy multiple deployment activities post-election and the ability for members to absorb this level of technology change while serving constituents. Members' needs are to be addressed based on priority, each requiring unique technology provisioning, sequencing, and support following the election. Phase 1 will focus on computers and telephony services for newly elected members and their staff who choose to occupy existing constituency office. As scheduling permits, printers and network will be replaced in follow-up stages. Phase 2 will extend the focus on newly elected members who choose to establish new offices and returning MPs who must move their constituency office due to the new electoral boundaries. This phase may occur earlier depending on lease and occupancy dates. For new members establishing new offices, a full deployment will occur at this phase. For returning members moving offices, the program will focus on the telephony lifecycle, as the legacy service might not be available in those new locations. All remaining technology replacement would be targeted in Phase 3. Phase 3 will complete the technology lifecycle for returning members who are maintaining their existing constituency office. The deployment strategy will remain flexible to address unique scenarios and address members' concerns should we need to accelerate or slow down the deployment to a particular constituency office. This recommended post-election refresh approach leverages a unique opportunity to address constituency office technology needs while capitalizing on the organizational changes associated with the election. Overall, conducting the technology refresh following the election presents a strategic opportunity to align timing, resources, and organizational changes in a way that maximizes efficiency and minimizes disruption while addressing the critical need to update aging IT hardware, systems, and services. Pour organiser
To effectively organize the life cycle technology activities, a central team from the administration will supervise participation of riding offices as well as transformations on site, acting as single interlocutor for members or their designated representative and ensuring uniform communication of information between projects for deployment. We seek to simplify the complex sequence of technological transformation while concentrating on client experience. Cohesive support by the administration during each stage of the migration will guarantee that the riding staff is ready and productive with the new technology while minimizing the riding office operations.
The last 15 years, the constituency office technology refresh model has been to align these activities with a forthcoming election. The House administration will manage the temporary cost within existing budgets. If additional funding is required, the House administration will seek funding through the supplementary estimates. This approach ensures that available funding is leveraged effectively over the course of the refresh initiative, aligning expenditures with the House of Commons budgetary cycles. This concludes my presentation. My colleague and I would be happy to answer questions or concerns.
Merci pour cette
Thank you for that presentation. Very quickly, Mr. Decaire, do you have any questions, colleagues? Thank you. Ms. de Bellefeuille, no? No? This is fine. All right. Is there consensus to approve the recommendations as presented?
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues.
We'll just have a brief pause.